The North Sea lay beneath them like a mirror of iron, restless and cold, trembling under the breath of an endless wind. In the half-light of a late June evening, the horizon was no more than a thin bruise of violet and gold, the kind of beauty that could only exist before death. From the base at Wick, Scotland, the consolidated Canso A, known among the crews simply as the Catalina, rose from the foam, its twin engines humming against the grey sky. 8 men inside, each in silence. They were bound north into the steel heart of the Atlantic, where submarines of the Kriegsmarine hunted beneath the surface like ghosts. In the cockpit sat Flight Lieutenant David "Pop" Hornell, his face calm beneath the rim of his headset. The nickname Pop came from his quiet gravity, the paternal steadiness that made younger airmen trust him without question. He was 34, older than most, and he carried the look of a man who had already seen the edge of fear and come back with a kind of peace. He adjusted the throttles, glanced at his co-pilot. Patrol 24, June 44. "Let's make it clean," he said. The words were ordinary, almost casual, yet in them was the rhythm of a man who understood the mathematics of risk: time, distance, fuel, visibility, and chance. Outside, the sea glimmered in the shifting light. Below the clouds, the ocean moved with the weary power of something ancient. The Catalina climbed slowly, its long wings flexing, engines vibrating through the hull. Inside, the crew settled into routine. Navigator bent over his charts, radio operator adjusting static-filled frequencies, gunners scanning the waves for periscopes or wakes. Hours passed. The Atlantic stretched endlessly, vast and indifferent. The radio crackled with brief fragments of other patrols, positions, sightings, weather, nothing else, nothing. Hornell leaned back, watching the sky darken toward the horizon. He thought, briefly, of Ontario, of the quiet streets of Mimico, the smell of wood smoke in winter, the slow, tender rituals of peace. The thought passed. He reached for his thermos, drank black coffee gone cold. Far to the northeast, a bank of clouds thickened. Rain smeared the windshield. The aircraft rocked gently in the crosswind, yet the men said nothing. Silence in war was not emptiness, it was focus. Then, at 1900 hours, a flicker of movement below, a dark line breaking the surface, deliberate, mechanical, alive. The observer called out, "Contact! Bearing 180, surfaced vessel." Hornell's eyes narrowed. Through the binoculars, a grey shape cut through the waves, unmistakable. A German U-boat surfaced, perhaps recharging batteries. For a second, the cockpit froze in electric stillness. Then came the command, low and measured. "Turn her about. We're going in." The Catalina banked wide, wings slicing through the mist, engines deepening in tone. The sun had already slipped behind the clouds, leaving only a thin stripe of copper light on the horizon. The ocean, once serene, now felt like a battlefield waiting for sound. Inside the hull, the men strapped in, bomb release mechanisms armed, guns loaded. The aircraft descended. The smell of fuel and salt mingled with something sharp, adrenaline, fear, inevitability. Outside, the U-boat crew had seen them too. The German vessel began to swing its anti-aircraft guns upward, black silhouettes against the dying light. Hornell kept his course steady, descending through the clouds until the altimeter trembled near sea level. Below, the dark sea boiled in the slipstream. The battle was seconds away. And in that moment, amid the roar of wind and the electric hum of tension, Hornell whispered to himself, "Not today, you bastard. Not today." The engines screamed. The Catalina dove. The sea exploded into motion. The Catalina's descent tore the air like a blade, its engines clawing at the mist as Hornell lined up his attack run. Beneath him, the U-boat began to maneuver frantically, its deck crew sprinting to the guns. Two 20mm Oerlikons snapped into position, and within seconds, the first streaks of tracer fire climbed toward the sky. The cockpit filled with the sharp, violent rhythm of impact. Thunk, thunk, thunk. Rounds tore through the fuselage, shattered the starboard engine cowling, and stitched a pattern of death across the right wing. Smoke began to coil into the slipstream, dark and oily, flung backward like a flag of defiance. Inside, the air smelled of burning oil and metal. The flight engineer shouted over the intercom, "Starboard engine hit! Fire in the nacelle!" "Feather the prop!" Hornell barked back. But before the command could be carried out, the propeller burst into flame, a swirling orange wound against the grey sky. The Catalina shuddered, her right side dipping dangerously. Hornell fought the controls, feeling the yoke vibrate beneath his hands. Each movement was heavier now, slower. Yet his eyes never left the target. Below, the German gunners reloaded. Their tracers crossed the sky like strings of red fire. Bullets clanged against the hull. A window shattered. The navigator cried out, blood spattering his instruments. The co-pilot turned to Hornell, face pale. "We're burning." Hornell didn't answer. He steadied the aircraft, levelled her wings. "We're attacking," he said simply. He brought the Catalina down to 50 feet above the sea, so low the spray from the waves lashed the belly of the aircraft. The bomb aimer, pressed against the glass blister in the nose, began the final countdown. "Steady, steady, now." At that instant, Hornell released the depth charges. 4 cylinders of steel dropped away, slicing through the air, disappearing into the dark surface below. A breathless second, then the ocean convulsed. A column of water erupted behind the U-boat, towering higher than its conning tower. The shock wave rippled outward, lifting the Catalina as though by an invisible hand. The submarine shuddered, pitched, and then, a soundless, terrible fracture, its hull cracked. Black smoke, white steam, and fragments of metal rose in a brief, violent ballet. "Direct hit!" the gunner shouted. "She's going down!" Through the smoke, Hornell saw the U-boat's stern lift, then vanish beneath the churning water. The Kriegsmarine flag disappeared into the deep. Victory. Let's make it clean. But the price came instantly. The starboard engine exploded, its mount tearing away from the wing. A flash of light, then a thunderous roar. Debris tore through the wingtip. Flames licked along the leading edge. The Catalina rolled violently. Hornell gritted his teeth, pulling against the control column. "Hold on!" he yelled. In the rear compartment, smoke poured through ruptured panels. Men coughed, gasped. The heat became unbearable. The gunner tried to douse the flames with the emergency extinguisher, but it was useless. The fire was fed by wind and fuel. The radio operator reached for the transmitter, but the panel was dead. The last bullet through the fuselage had severed the power line. No SOS, no contact. "Engine's gone," said the co-pilot, voice cracking. "She's not going to stay up." Hornell looked out at the sea, violent, white-capped, merciless. There was no choice. "Prepare for ditching," he ordered. He trimmed the nose slightly upward, aiming for a line between two crests. The wind screamed. The men braced. The first impact was brutal. The Catalina hit the water like a hammer striking steel, bounced once, twice, and then slammed down. A surge of black water smashed through the blister windows. One of the wings sheared off. The world became chaos, water, flame, and noise. And when the aircraft finally stopped, it was half submerged, the nose pointing downward, the tail bobbing like a dying creature. Hornell shouted, "Out! Everyone out!" They scrambled through the hatches into the freezing sea, clutching at the single inflatable dinghy that remained intact. The rest, punctured, burning, or gone. The fire hissed as the ocean swallowed it. Behind them, the wreckage of the Catalina drifted away, flames dimming in the fog. Somewhere below, the U-boat lay silent on the seabed. Above, the wind howled over the empty water. The battle was over, but the ordeal had just begun. By mid-1944, the Atlantic was no longer merely a sea. It was a corridor of survival. Every gallon of fuel, every ton of ammunition, every lifeline of bread and steel that crossed from the Americas to Europe travelled through its grey immensity. For the Allies, this ocean was an artery of destiny. For Germany, it was a hunting ground. The German Kriegsmarine had built its strategy around strangulation, to cut the Atlantic routes, to starve Britain and the invasion forces gathering for the liberation of Europe. Their submarines, the U-boats, were not only weapons but instruments of policy. Small, stealthy assassins designed to make an empire bleed slowly. By 1944, Allied technology had turned the tide. Long-range aircraft, radar, and improved sonar nets had driven most U-boats into hiding. But still, they hunted. The North Sea, stretching between Scotland and Norway, remained a dark corridor where the wolf packs could slip through under cloud and fog. It was here that No. 162 Squadron of the Royal Canadian Air Force had been assigned, a watchtower in motion, flying the consolidated Canso A, the amphibious cousin of the American Catalina. Hornell's aircraft was one of those solitary sentinels. His patrol was routine on paper, yet strategically essential. The mission's parameters, altitude, grid sectors, fuel reserves, were all derived from a massive Allied intelligence network, Enigma decrypts, convoy movement reports, and acoustic signatures plotted by the Admiralty's submarine tracking room in London. Each flight was a single thread in a global web of surveillance. To an outsider, 8 men in a flying boat might seem irrelevant beside the vast fleets of Normandy already in motion that June. Yet in truth, their duty secured the very flank of that invasion. The Atlantic lifeline to the beaches of France passed through these northern seas. One surviving U-boat could have slaughtered an entire convoy. Food for Britain, fuel for Sherman tanks, munitions for the push toward Berlin. U-225, the submarine Hornell destroyed, was newly commissioned, commanded by Kapitän Lieutenant Hans Benker. It carried torpedoes meant for those same convoys. Its loss was not symbolic, it was operationally decisive. The death of a single U-boat in 1944 meant fewer Allied ships sunk, fewer men drowned in the cold. Hornell's decision to attack despite engine fire, despite shattered communications, was therefore not just an act of courage. It was a continuation of strategy by instinct. He embodied the principle that initiative, once gained, must never be surrendered. Every commander understood this, but few lived it at such proximity to death. From a technical standpoint, Hornell's Canso A had little chance of survival once hit. Its twin Pratt & Whitney engines, unarmoured fuel lines, and large wing tanks made it a flying torch when struck by incendiary fire. Yet the aircraft's endurance and range were unmatched, allowing it to patrol sectors where land-based bombers could not. The RCAF crews knew that in the North Sea, their greatest ally was patience, and their greatest enemy, exposure. When Hornell chose to press the attack, he was applying, perhaps unconsciously, the cold arithmetic of the Atlantic War. Lose 1 plane, save 100 ships. Lose 8 men, save 1,000. In the calculus of total war, such numbers were merciless but clear. The tactical victory that day rippled far beyond its coordinates. Intelligence later confirmed that the sinking of U-1225 reduced submarine patrol density in the Norwegian sector for weeks. Convoys passing through those lanes reported no further losses during that period. But strategy is never purely mechanical. It is also psychological. The news of Hornell's action spread quickly through the RCAF. To airmen flying endless patrols over grey water, often seeing nothing for days, it was proof that courage still mattered, that vigilance was not in vain. In war, morale is a weapon no less powerful than bombs. Thus, the engagement of June 24, 1944, stands not merely as a tactical event, but as a node in the moral geometry of the Atlantic campaign. One man's defiance becoming a countercurrent against despair, a flare in the endless dusk of duty. They called him Pop, not out of mockery, but out of reverence, the way younger men name something solid, something that doesn't break. In a squadron where most were barely 20, David Ernest Hornell was the calm at the centre of turbulence. He carried his 34 years like a steady flame, not bright, not loud, but unwavering. He had been born in Mimico, Ontario, a small place by a great lake where winters were long and the air smelled of iron. Before the war, he had worked for a textile company, a man of ordinary habits, punctual, courteous, modest. But beneath that modesty was a quiet restlessness, a sense that life was not meant to be lived without test. When the war came, he volunteered for the Royal Canadian Air Force, not because he loved flying, but because he believed in responsibility. Those who served with him said he rarely raised his voice. His authority was built not on volume, but on presence. When he entered the hangar, the crew stopped joking. When he spoke in the cockpit, every order carried the gravity of certainty. Yet he was not cold. He listened. He remembered birthdays, small things. He had a way of turning fear into focus. Inside that Catalina, the men mirrored fragments of him. The co-pilot, Flight Officer Fernand St. Laurent, was quick-witted and proud, a Quebecer whose humour often cracked the long monotony of patrols. He loved to hum folk tunes through the intercom, until Hornell, half smiling, told him to save the singing for when we're home. The navigator, Sergeant Linton, thin and bespectacled, was methodical to the point of obsession, the kind of man who found comfort in coordinates, in the precision of lines on a chart, when everything else blurred into chaos. The gunners, Harper and McNaughton, were boys barely out of adolescence, faces still soft, but with eyes that had already seen too much. Together they formed an organism, one body with 8 hearts. When the plane was hit, something ancient stirred in each of them, the primal calculus of survival versus duty. They could have turned away when the right engine caught fire, when the radio went dead. No one would have blamed them. But Hornell's voice over the intercom was calm, almost fatherly. "Hold your course. She's not done yet." It wasn't command. It was belief. And belief is contagious. In that instant, the fear in their chests crystallized into purpose. St. Laurent steadied the gauges, though his hands trembled. Linton kept marking positions even as blood dripped onto his maps. Harper manned his gun until the ammunition was gone. They did these things not because they expected to live, but because Hornell expected it of them, and expectation, in that kind of man, felt like destiny. Later, after the crash, that same moral gravity held them together on the sea. The cold was an enemy that came without warning, creeping through muscle and bone. The dinghy was small, one intact raft meant for 4 men, now holding 8. Their radio was dead, their flares soaked. Around them, the horizon was empty. Grey sky, grey sea, and silence. Hornell took charge again, quietly. He organized a rotation, half in the water, half on the raft. He volunteered first, stripping his jacket, sliding into the freezing surf. His breath hitched, but he said nothing. Every 15 minutes, he called for the next man to swap. Every 15 minutes, he gave up his place again. St. Laurent, shivering, tried to protest. Hornell only said, "You'll need your strength when they find us." But he did not say if. He said when. Hours passed. The waves tossed them like driftwood. One by one, consciousness faded. Linton fainted and was pulled back. Harper hallucinated about the smell of coffee. The youngest, St. Laurent, finally fell still. His heart stopped some time before dawn. By morning, Hornell's eyes were glazed with exhaustion. His lips were blue. Yet when he saw the rescue plane in the distance, he smiled faintly and whispered, "Told you." When the British trawler finally hauled them aboard, Hornell was barely alive. He waited until he saw his men wrapped in blankets, breathing. Then he let go. His last expression was not fear, nor pain, but relief. The look of a man who had kept his word. To those who found his body later that night, it seemed impossible that one so quiet could have carried such weight. But that was his nature. Like the sea itself, calm above, immense beneath. The sea at night is not black. It is iron. It moves with the slow breathing of something immense and indifferent. Under the dim aurora of the northern sky, the dinghy rose and fell, as though the world itself had become one endless exhalation. 8 men had become 7, then 6. The hours no longer had numbers. The clock had stopped. Only the pulse of survival remained. By now their voices had faded to whispers, hoarse, salt-bitten murmurs. The sound of wind drowned everything else. The temperature hovered near freezing, each splash of seawater slicing into flesh like glass. Hornell's body was failing. His eyes had sunk into their sockets, his face drawn tight beneath the stubble. Yet he kept moving, mechanically, rhythmically, as though repetition could keep death at bay. "Rotate," he said, voice cracked. "Next man in." The men obeyed. It was easier to obey than to think. Every movement sent tremors through the dinghy. The raft was designed for 4, but now held 6 bodies pressed together, knees against ribs, breath mingling in shallow gasps. The rubber squeaked under the weight, seams straining, each wave threatening to tear it apart. Somewhere far away, a signal flare might have glowed for an instant, unseen. Somewhere else, Allied ships combed the horizon, unaware that heroes floated beneath their roots. By midnight, frost formed on their clothing. Fingers turned white, then grey. Linton's chart case, the last relic of order, drifted away into the dark, a small square of paper dissolving into the sea. Harper whispered that he could see land, though there was none. Macnaghten sang softly, voice broken by exhaustion, an old marching tune without melody. And Hornell, he simply endured. Every 15 minutes he slid back into the water, clinging to the side, letting the sea swallow his body to the chest. The cold hit him like a hammer each time, but he never cried out. He never spoke of pain. He simply breathed in, breathed out, and watched the horizon. He was not thinking of medals, nor of God, nor of glory. He was thinking of the men, the young ones, their families, their mothers, the promises that should not be broken. Responsibility had become his final warmth. At dawn, a pale light spread across the waves. It was thin and merciless, revealing every wound, every bruise, every shiver. St. Laurent was gone. His body drifted a few yards away, face serene, as if asleep. They pulled him back, but he was already still. The others wept without tears. They had no water left in them. Hornell looked at his watch, stopped long ago at 21:40, and smiled faintly, as though amused by the futility of time. 21 hours, he murmured. Not bad, boys. At 1600 hours, a sound, distant, faint, drifted through the wind. A low hum. The men raised their heads in disbelief. The hum grew louder. Over the western horizon, a dark shape appeared. A Catalina, like their own, circling, searching. They tried to wave, but their arms felt like lead. Someone fired the last flare. It sputtered weakly, a wounded spark against the endless grey.
Are they all aboard?
Minutes later, the shadow above them banked, dipped its wings. Acknowledgement. Rescue was coming. Hornell exhaled slowly. His hands, swollen and blue, trembled on the edge of the raft. The others watched him, silent. When the trawler reached them an hour later, ropes were thrown, voices shouted, the living pulled aboard with the tenderness of disbelief. Hornell was the last. He refused help until the others were safe. When they were, he allowed himself to be lifted. On deck, wrapped in a blanket, he asked quietly, "Are they all aboard?" "Yes, sir," someone said. He smiled, the kind of smile that carries an entire life inside it. Then his eyes closed. For a moment, the wind dropped. The sea seemed to hold its breath. The men who survived would later say that his passing felt like a tide turning, not an end, but a stillness. In that instant, the world was both vast and intimate, an ocean reduced to one heartbeat. And then the heartbeat was gone. When the trawler reached port the next morning, the wind had died. The sea lay glassy and strange, as if it too were exhausted by what it had taken. 6 men were carried ashore on stretchers, their bodies half alive, their skin raw with salt. Above them, the gulls cried. Not mournful, simply indifferent, the way nature always is after heroism. In the hospital ward at Lerwick, the survivors spoke little. They were men between 2 silences, the roar of combat behind them and the hush of loss before them. Only Linton, the navigator, whispered once to the nurse, "He waited until we were safe." News travelled quickly through the North Atlantic Command. The coded dispatch read, June 24, 1944, Canso A, No. 162. SQN, Arsenafe, attacked and destroyed enemy submarine U-1225 in position 64 degrees 47 N, Mundagi 27, E. Aircraft lost, 5 survivors. Captain deceased after rescue. Action considered of highest gallantry. In London, the Admiralty underlined one phrase, destroyed enemy submarine. But among the aircrews of WWII, the underlined words were different. Captain deceased after rescue. When the war ended, statisticians would count thousands of engagements, tonnages sunk, convoys protected. Yet the men who flew patrols knew that numbers meant nothing without the invisible currency of trust. Hornell had given them that currency, a moral credit that outlasted the mission. He was awarded the Victoria Cross posthumously, the first for a member of the Royal Canadian Air Force in the Second World War. The citation, written in the flat diction of officialdom, could not capture the reality. The smell of burning fuel, the freezing water, the small human acts that had kept courage alive for 21 hours. But beneath its bureaucratic phrasing, one sentence carried the echo of truth. By his courageous determination and devotion to duty, Flight Lieutenant Hornell saved the lives of his crew and ensured the destruction of the enemy. In Toronto, his family received the medal. His mother held it in both hands, as though it were still warm from his touch. Outside, victory parades rolled down Yonge Street, but she stood quietly by the window, the noise of celebration distant and unreal. Years later, in peacetime, the name Hornell would adorn air cadet squadrons, schools, and streets. The story entered textbooks, simplified for children. Yet somewhere between the printed lines and the official ceremonies lay the truer memory, not of glory, but of resolve. Historians would note that U-1225's sinking coincided with a measurable lull in submarine activity in the Norwegian sector. securing the supply lanes for the northern convoys that fed the Allied advance after D-Day. Strategists would point to the engagement as a model of offensive persistence, the doctrine that even a damaged aircraft should press the attack if success could cripple the enemy's capability. But for the men who had known him, none of that mattered. What endured was the image of a figure waist-deep in freezing water, steadying a raft of broken men, saying, "You'll need your strength when they find us." Every generation retells the story in its own accent. Pilots of new wars, flying drones instead of Catalinas, still find something unshakable in his example. The refusal to surrender moral command even when physical control is lost. Time, as always, erodes the details. The sound of the engine, the smell of oil, the precise hue of the northern sky, but not the essence. The essence remains, that courage is not noise nor fury, but endurance under clarity. Somewhere off the coast of Norway, in that vast, indifferent water, rests the wreckage of WWII, and somewhere above it, invisible yet real, lingers the memory of a man who understood the simplest law of command: lead until the last breath, and then, by your silence, lead still. If Hornell could have spoken once more, not to his men, but to history, his words might have sounded like the sea, patient, deliberate, stripped of everything unnecessary. He would have said that command is not about power, but about direction. That in war, leadership is measured not in victories achieved, but in the kind of silence one leaves behind. He would have said that every decision made at altitude is also a wager with time, a bet that one's courage will outlast the enemy's opportunity. From the strategist's view, the engagement of June 24th was a simple equation: a target sighted, a weapon delivered, an enemy destroyed. The cold language of reports can make even heroism sound like logistics, but beneath that language lies the one thing no report can calculate: the moral geometry of choice. Hornell's choice, when the starboard engine caught fire, was to advance, not retreat. In pure doctrine, the decision was unsound. An aircraft crippled, crew at risk, no radio contact. Yet in moral doctrine, the unwritten code that separates command from compliance, it was perfect. Because to retreat would have been to unteach everything he had ever shown his men. That duty does not depend on circumstance. That courage is a verb, not a condition. War, at its core, is a competition of wills disguised as a contest of machines. The Germans had their submarines, sleek, efficient, mathematical. The Allies had their bombers and radars. But what decided the sea was not metal. It was temperament. The side that could remain human longer, under fear, under fatigue, under chaos, would prevail. Hornell's temperament was a weapon. Calm under impact, controlled under flame, he fought not the enemy's steel, but the enemy's confidence. His defiance, the refusal to yield control, even when engulfed by fire, reverberated through unseen corridors, in mess halls, in briefing rooms, in the silent hearts of pilots who learned that survival is sometimes secondary to meaning. There is a paradox every strategist must face. The closer one comes to perfection in killing, the more fragile one becomes in living. Hornell, in his quiet way, solved that paradox. He turned violence into duty, duty into compassion, and compassion into resolve. His war ended not with a kill, but with a gesture, giving up his place on a raft so that another might live. It was, in a way, the most strategic act of all, the transmutation of victory from destruction into preservation. Modern warfare has changed. The sea no longer hides wolves. It hums with satellites and sonar arrays. Pilots now watch their targets through lenses instead of windshields. Yet the lesson remains. Technology multiplies capability, but it cannot replace conviction. When systems fail, when signals vanish, when screens go dark, The only remaining command system is the human spirit. Hornell's final decision, to stay in the water, to lead from suffering, is what every commander fears and secretly hopes for. The moment when leadership ceases to be hierarchical and becomes sacrificial. It is the moment when strategy touches eternity. Perhaps that is what separates victory from triumph. Victory ends a battle. Triumph endures beyond it. Hornell's triumph was not over U-2225, nor over the sea. It was over the void, the silence that swallows men when they stop believing in each other. He refused that silence. And so, across the decades, his voice still drifts above the waves. Not loud, not heroic, but steady, as if saying, "Hold your course," even when it burns. In the heart of the frozen sea, when the flames still clung to the wing, he did not ask how long he would live. He asked how long they could. And that question, spoken once in silence, is the only definition of courage the ocean remembers.